Damn it. How dare you quit your job? And how are we going to live now? My mother-in-law yelled at me, pushing me down the stairs, and my husband did absolutely nothing. But when they saw the police come through the door, they turned pale. Irene felt the weight of silence like an invisible yoke, as if the house itself conspired against her. She stood at the door, key still in hand, watching the disaster unfold before her eyes. The living room was plunged into chaotic disarray, empty bottles scattered across the floor, plates with food remnants stacked on the coffee table, and the television on with the volume at an unbearable level. On the couch, with a lost look on the screen, Sergio drank a beer with the carelessness of a man with no obligations. She closed the door with a soft click and moved forward with slow but firm steps. She had had an exhausting day at work. The bills were piling up, and her body was screaming for rest. But there was her husband, sunk into the comfort of idleness while she alone bore the weight of the world. "I see your day has been productive," Irene said with a tone that oscillated between irony and contained despair. Sergio didn't even turn his head. He took a long sip of his beer before responding in a dragging voice. "I'm at home, relaxing. Is that a problem now?" Irene clenched her teeth and dropped her purse on the table with a dry thud. "Yes, Sergio, it is a problem. While you relax, I work from sunup to sundown to pay for this house, the food, and your whims. Don't you think something here is wrong?" He sighed, as if the conversation was already exhausting him before it even started. "It's not as easy as you think, Irene. Finding a job these days is complicated. They don't just accept anyone. Companies want young people with experience and willing to work for a pittance. And what have you done today to look for work?" Sergio shrugged with an indifference that chilled Irene's blood. "I checked out some offers on the internet. All garbage. Did you call anyone? Did you get any response from the resumes you supposedly sent?" Silence was the only answer. Irene felt anger climbing up her throat. "You're not doing anything, Sergio. You just sit here day after day waiting for a job to fall from the sky while I pay for everything. Do you know how many bills we have pending? Do you know that we barely have money for food?" Sergio gestured vaguely with his hand and took another sip of his beer. "You always exaggerate, Irene. We're not that bad off." That phrase was the last straw. "We're not that bad off?" She repeated, feeling her voice rise uncontrollably. "Do you want me to tell you how we are? The rent is late. The electricity too. I haven't bought meat in 2 weeks because we can't afford to spend money on anything that isn't strictly necessary. And yet you managed to buy beer." Sergio looked at her with annoyance and set the empty bottle down on the table with a dry thud. "Don't come at me with sermons. Finding a job is what I'm trying to do, but things are not that simple. You can't understand because you have a secure salary." Irene felt a sting in her chest. "A secure salary? Do you think my job is a privilege?" "It's a sacrifice, Sergio. Do you know how many times I've wanted to quit? How many times I've reached my limit? But I don't do it because if I fail, who pays for this house?" Sergio looked away, fixing his eyes on the TV screen. "Stop dramatizing." Irene tasted the bitter flavor of disillusionment. "I don't know what's worse, Sergio. That you're a layabout or that you don't even have the decency to admit it." He got up from the couch with a sudden movement and looked at her with contained fury. "Now I'm a layabout? Sure, why not? I'm always the problem for you." "You are," Irene said without hesitation. Sergio observed her for a long moment and then dropped the remote control on the table with a dry thud. "I'm tired of your damn complaints. And what are you going to do about it? Will you get a job? Will you do something for this family?" Sergio didn't answer. He grabbed his jacket and left the house, slamming the door with a bang. Irene stood there, trembling with rage. She felt the tension take hold of her muscles, her entire body seeming to tremble with helplessness. The sound of the phone broke the silence like a slap. With a dark premonition, she approached and saw the name on the screen. Brigilda. She took a deep breath before answering. "Hello, Brigilda," Irene said, the harsh and shrill voice of her mother-in-law. "I need you to transfer me money." Irene's pulse quickened. "What?" "Yes, It's urgent. I have to pay the car loan and I'm short of money this month. You have a good salary, right? It won't cost you anything to help me out a bit. Irene felt a pressure in her chest. I can't give you more money, Brigilda. We don't even have enough for ourselves. The tone of the mother-in-law changed instantly, becoming more cutting, almost venomous. Since when have you become so selfish, Irene? It's not selfishness. It's common sense. Common sense? She laughed forcefully. When Sergio and you got married, I treated you like a daughter. Is this how you repay me now? Irene closed her eyes, feeling the anger grow inside her. Brigilda, I've been helping you for months. I can't keep doing this. Of course you can. You just don't want to. I'm not going to argue this with you. Her mother-in-law's scream left her frozen. Damn it. How do you leave me in this situation? You're ungrateful. The phone went silent. Irene let the mobile fall onto the table with her breath catching. Something inside her changed at that moment. She was tired of paying for everything, of supporting a man who did nothing for her, of sustaining a mother-in-law who saw her as an inexhaustible source of money, of being trapped in a life that was suffocating her. She sat down on the couch, looked around, and saw the house she was supporting with so much effort. She saw Sergio's clothes thrown on the floor, the dirty dishes he couldn't bother to wash, the bills piled up on the table. For the first time in years, she felt she had reached her limit. She wasn't going to keep supporting a family that didn't value her. She grabbed her purse, took out her computer, and opened her email. The cursor blinked on the screen as she looked at the message she had saved for days. Subject: job offer in another city. With trembling hands, she wrote a response. I accept the offer. Please tell me the details for the relocation. She pressed send and continued to stare at the screen. She knew nothing would be the same again. But maybe, for the first time in a long time, that was exactly what she needed most. Irene closed her computer and stared at the screen, feeling a strange mix of liberation and fear. She had taken a step from which there was no return. Her breathing was deep, her mind was in turmoil, but something inside her whispered that she was doing the right thing. Sergio hadn't returned yet. He had left angry, and truth be told, Irene felt no urgency to know where he was. She knew that sooner or later he would return, with the same lost look and the same old excuses. The sound of the door opening pulled her from her thoughts. These were not heavy steps, but dragging ones, like those of someone trying not to make noise. Irene didn't move from the couch, but her body tensed up. Sergio appeared in the doorway of the living room with his jacket hanging off one shoulder and an unmistakable odor permeating his clothes. It wasn't just the stench of alcohol. There was something else. A sweet, intense perfume that didn't belong to her. Irene narrowed her eyes without saying anything. Still up, Sergio said with a raspy voice, throwing the keys on the table. Didn't know you were one of those wives who wait up for their husbands like a submissive spouse. Irene kept her expression neutral. Where were you? He snorted and walked to the kitchen, taking a bottle of water from the fridge. Just out. Needed to clear my head. Irene felt the same sense of emptiness as always. As if she was talking to someone beyond help, as if she was in an endless cycle. But this time, her silence wasn't resignation. It was planning. You smell strange, she blurted out without looking away. Sergio paused for a second, then feigned indifference. It's the bar I was at. Lots of people, lots of smoke, lots of cheap perfumes. Irene tilted her head slightly without responding. She watched him drink water and stagger a bit as he moved. His nonchalance was insulting. Your mom called me today, she added calmly. Sergio closed his eyes for a second, as if the mere mention of Brigilda exhausted him. Don't tell me. What did she want this time? Money, Irene replied straightforwardly. I told her no. Sergio opened his eyes and looked at her for the first time. You told her no? Yes. Silence settled in the room like a heavy burden. Sergio set the bottle down on the table too forcefully. Why do you have to be like that? She's my mother. And this is my life, Irene retorted. I'm not going to keep paying for her whims. Sergio looked at her with that familiar expression of annoyance. Then, without another word, he turned and headed to the bedroom. Irene stayed in the living room, listening as he slammed the door. The next day, Brigilda showed up at the house. Irene was in the kitchen when she heard the insistent knocking at the door. She didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Irene, open the door, the woman's authoritative voice demanded. Irene closed her eyes for a moment before opening. Brigilda entered like a storm, in her flawless leather jacket and an annoyed expression. What's this about you not being able to help me with a loan? Irene crossed her arms. I'm not going to keep supporting you. Brigilda looked at her as if she had spoken blasphemy. Sergio told me you're doing well at work. Don't come at me with excuses. It's none of your business. Of course it is, the woman replied venomously. Or, did you forget everything I've done for you guys? Irene felt a laugh choke in her throat. What you've done for us? Want me to list how much money we've spent on you? Brigilda narrowed her eyes and moved closer, her expression turning grim. You're ungrateful. And you're an opportunist, Irene responded, this time without fear. For a second, Brigilda seemed about to slap her. Her hands trembled, her eyes were ablaze with fury. I won't forget this, the woman whispered before turning and walking out of the house, slamming the door behind her. That night, Sergio didn't return. It wasn't until the next morning that Irene found her bank account with less money than it should have. Her heart skipped a beat. She logged into the bank app and checked the transactions. There was a money transfer to Sergio's account. It wasn't much, but enough to be concerning. Her pulse quickened as she tried to understand what was happening. When Sergio returned home that night, she was already waiting for him. Did you take money from my account? He didn't even seem surprised. Don't exaggerate, Irene. It was just a little. I'll pay it back. It's not your money. I'm your husband. Aren't we supposed to share everything? Irene felt the fury burst within her. Not when you're a parasite. Sergio's eyes darkened. You have no right to talk to me like that. And you have no right to steal from me. The two stood looking at each other in a silent standoff, each waiting for the other to break first. That night, Irene checked her things and secured her important documents in a safe place. She began to notice more strange things. A shirt of Sergio's with red lipstick on the collar, a receipt from an expensive restaurant where she had never been, perfume on his clothes that wasn't hers. Irene's stomach clenched. Confirmation came in the form of a call. The phone rang while she was in the kitchen. An unknown number. Irene? Who's speaking? The voice sounded nervous, almost trembling. You don't know me, but I need to tell you something about Sergio. Irene's heart raced. Who are you? What's with Sergio? There was background noise. Then, the line went dead. Irene held the phone in her hand, feeling something inside her irreversibly break. The phone slipped from Irene's hands and fell to the floor with a dull thud. Her breathing was erratic, her heart pounding furiously within her chest. The call had been cut off, but the echo of those words continued to resonate in her head. You don't know me, but I need to tell you something about Sergio. She slowly crouched down and picked up the phone with trembling fingers. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. Who was that woman? What was she going to tell her? Why had she hung up? Or worse, why had she been interrupted? She felt a chill run down her arms. She looked at the phone screen, hoping the number would call back, but the screen remained still. She stepped back and leaned against the table, trying to calm down. Her eyes drifted to the closed door of the room where Sergio was sleeping, oblivious to everything. The feeling in her chest changed. For a long time, she had felt frustration, exhaustion, anger. But now, what she felt was fear. Something was wrong. And for the first time, Irene truly feared not knowing who she had been living with all those years. Her hands burned. She felt the need to do something. She couldn't just sit there, waiting for answers that might never come. She walked to the room, stopped in front of the closed door, and pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. With as much discretion as possible, she turned the doorknob. The door creaked open, and at the back of the room, she saw Sergio sleeping face down, his breathing heavy and his body motionless. Irene entered with light steps, avoiding the creaking boards. She approached the wardrobe and carefully opened it. Her heart pounded hard. Every sound seemed deafening. The drawers were filled with disorganized clothes, but something caught her attention. At the back, among several wrinkled shirts, she found an envelope. Her name wasn't written on it, but something inside her said she should open it. She reached in and pulled out the papers it contained. They were bank statements. Her stomach sank as she began to review the transactions. Large sums of money had been withdrawn. Transfers to unknown accounts. Recent dates. She clumsily stuffed the papers back into the envelope. Her legs were about to give way. She wasn't imagining things. It wasn't just fears. It wasn't just irresponsibility. Sergio was using her. She felt her throat close up and tears sting her eyes. She bit her lip to make no noise. She left the room with the envelope clutched in her hands. She couldn't stay in that house a second longer. She had to leave. And she had to make sure that Sergio and his mother never touched her money again. She spent the entire night awake, the envelope in her lap, her mind plotting plans, thinking about what to do. At dawn, when Sergio got up and found her awake on the couch, he gave her a tired look. Back to your dramas again? Irene stared at him intently. Where's all the money you've been taking out of my account? The question caught him off guard. What are you talking about? Irene stood up and threw the envelope at him. This. Sergio caught it, opened it, and his eyes darkened as he saw the documents. Who gave you this? It doesn't matter, she replied firmly. Answer the damn question. Sergio clenched his jaw. It's not what you think. Oh, isn't it? Then what is it? Want to explain why there are transfers from my account to yours? Want to explain why I've been working like a slave while you live the high life with MY money? Sergio let out a forced laugh. You're exaggerating. No, I'm not exaggerating. I'm fed up, Sergio. It's over. He looked at her in disbelief. It's over? Irene felt a lump in her throat, but forced herself to stand firm. Yes, I'm leaving this hell. And I'm going to stop working to cover all your whims. The words came out with such force that she didn't even realize someone else was in the room. A movement at the doorway made her turn around. Brujilda was there. Her face was a mask of fury. What did you say? Irene felt a shiver. I'm leaving. The woman's face twisted into an expression of pure hatred. Damn it. How dare you quit your job? And how are we going to live now? Irene felt the room grow smaller. Brujilda advanced with violent steps, her body shaking with rage. We gave you everything. You owe us this. I owe you nothing, Irene spat. Brujilda raised her hands in a violent gesture. Sergio didn't move. He said nothing. He did nothing. The blow came without warning. The push was so strong that Irene felt her body lift off the ground. The world spun. Stairs. Fall. Impact. Pain. Darkness. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Irene didn't know how long it had passed. When she opened her eyes, she saw the blurred ceiling. Her ears rang. Her head throbbed with unbearable pain. She tried to move, but her entire body ached. And then she saw Sergio, standing at the top of the stairs, looking at her, expressionless, motionless, as if he had not just seen his wife tumble down the stairs, as if nothing had happened. The silence was worse than the fall. But then another sound was heard. A door opening. Voices. Firm steps. Someone entered the house. Sergio and Brujilda turned pale. It was the police. The white light of the fluorescents blinded her when she opened her eyes. An intermittent beeping pierced the silence, rhythmic, insistent. Her head throbbed with unbearable pressure, as if something inside her was about to explode. She tried to move, but a sharp pain in her arm immobilized her immediately. The smell of disinfectant and the rough sheets confirmed what her mind had not yet fully processed. She was in a hospital. She blinked several times, trying to clear the fog clouding her thoughts. She remembered the impact, the fall, the cold of the floor against her skin. And then, the image of Sergio, looking down at her from the top of the stairs with the same indifference with which he watched the television every night. A wave of anger rose in her throat. A soft murmur in the hallway distracted her. As she slowly turned her head, she saw the silhouette of a nurse leaving the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. And then she saw him. Sergio was sitting in a chair next to the bed. His eyes were sunken, his hair disheveled. His expression seemed worried, but Irene was no longer naive enough to believe it. "You look terrible," she murmured with a raspy voice. Sergio smiled tensely, as if that comment had given him permission to show vulnerability. "I haven't slept since they brought you here," he said. "I couldn't leave you alone." Irene felt her mouth dry. "How did I get here?" Sergio looked down. "They called an ambulance. They said it was an accident." Silence settled between them. Irene watched his face carefully. She had learned to read the lies in his expression, in the way his jaw tensed when he was about to make something up. "It wasn't an accident," she finally said. Sergio suddenly looked up. "Irene. No, don't do this." Sergio leaned toward her, bringing his face close with a desperate expression. "You can't say that. You can't make this bigger than it is." "Bigger?" Irene felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. "Your mother pushed me down the stairs, Sergio." He clenched his fists. It was a moment of tension. "She didn't do it on purpose." "My God, Sergio." Irene felt rage consume her. "Do you realize what you're saying?" Sergio took her hand. "Listen, we can't denounce my mother. We can't destroy our family over this." Irene immediately pulled her hand away, as if the contact burned her. "Our family? Destroy? Sergio, she tried to kill me. And you." Her voice broke for a moment. "You just stood there, watching me." Sergio averted his gaze, fixing it on the sheet. "It wasn't like that." "Yes, it was." A knock on the door interrupted their confrontation. A police officer in pristine uniform entered the room, his gaze fixed on Irene. "Mrs. Martinez, I need to ask you some questions about what happened." Sergio immediately stood up. "Officer, my wife is still recovering." "Perhaps." "I'm fine," interrupted Irene. Sergio turned to her in disbelief. "Irene." She held his gaze coldly. "I want to talk to him." The officer took out a notebook from his pocket and settled into the chair next to the bed. "I understand there was an altercation at your home." Irene felt the weight of Sergio's gaze on her. "Yes," she whispered. The officer waited. "Can you tell me what happened?" The words stuck in her throat. She could feel the tension in the air, the way Sergio held his breath. If she told the truth, it would all be over. If she lied, she would continue to be trapped in this hell. Her fingers clenched against the sheet. "I was pushed," she murmured. Sergio took a deep breath. The officer wrote something in his notebook. "Who did it?" Irene swallowed. "My mother-in-law." The pen stopped moving. "Brigilda Martinez?" "Yes." The officer looked up. "Do you want to press charges?" Sergio stepped forward, his shadow darkening the edge of the bed. "Irene." She ignored him. "Yes." The air seemed to grow heavier. The officer nodded and put the notebook back in his pocket. "Understood. We will conduct a formal investigation." Sergio let out a nervous laugh. "This is madness." The officer looked at him calmly. "Mr. Martinez, if your mother committed a crime, she will be prosecuted accordingly." Sergio ran a hand through his hair, visibly upset. "You can't do this." The officer tilted his head. "We can and we will." Sergio clenched his jaw, his eyes reflecting something Irene had never seen before. Something dark, threatening. The officer turned to Irene one last time. "We will be back as the investigation progresses." She nodded, feeling a slight relief. When the officer left, the silence became unbearable. Sergio brought his hands to his head and paced back and forth. "Do you realize what you've just done? What I had to do?" Sergio looked at her with something more than anger. "And what now, Irene? Do you want to see my mother in jail?" Irene didn't answer. Sergio looked at her with eyes full of rage. "You're a damn selfish woman." Irene's phone vibrated on the nightstand. Unknown number. Sergio turned to her, breathing heavily. "Don't answer it." Irene ignored him and swiped her finger across the screen. "Irene?" It was the same voice. "Yes. Who are you?" The woman paused. "Your life is in danger. Sergio is not who you think he is." Cold slid down Irene's skin like a sharp knife. "What are you saying?" "I can't talk long, but listen carefully. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just the manipulation." The voice broke for a moment. "Sergio and his mother have been doing illegal things. They used your account. They're involved with dangerous people." Irene felt the air stuck in her lungs. "What people?" There was a noise on the line. "Check his papers." The call ended. Sergio watched her, expectant. Irene slowly lowered the phone. "Who was it?" "Nobody." Sergio stepped forward. "Don't lie." "How dare you ask me not to lie?" Sergio furrowed his brow. Irene took a deep breath and tried not to tremble. "Tell me the truth, Sergio. What have you been doing with my account?" The silence betrayed him. Irene knew. He was using her. And perhaps he was doing something much worse. Irene's heart raced, her mind fitting together pieces that until that moment had felt disconnected. Sergio was not just stealing money, he was not just a freeloader who refused to work. There was something more, something dark that had been simmering in the shadows. When Sergio saw that Irene was no longer looking away, that she was no longer afraid, his expression changed. "You don't need to worry about that." Irene felt a chill. "Yes, I do." Sergio leaned over her, his eyes cold. "Then you won't like what you find." Irene knew she could no longer sit still. That very night, as soon as Sergio left the hospital, she contacted the police. The next day, she handed over all the evidence. The transactions, the forged documents, the accounts in Brugilda's name that should never have existed. Sergio and his mother were no longer just suspects in fraud and identity theft. Now, they were in the sights of justice. The echo of the officer's footsteps resonated through the corridors as Brugilda struggled in vain. Her screams turned into sharp shrieks, her voice laden with anger and despair. "You can't do this to me. I didn't do anything. Let me go." The handcuffs shone under the cold lights of the police station, tightly secured around her wrists. Her hair, always perfectly styled, was now disheveled, and her face contorted with the fury of a cornered beast. Sergio was a few meters away from her, surrounded by 2 officers. Unlike his mother, he wasn't shouting, he wasn't resisting. He stood stiff, eyes fixed on the ground, his expression a mix of defeat and frustration. Irene watched them from the other side of the room, arms crossed over her chest. She felt no satisfaction, no relief. Only a vast emptiness, as if everything she had carried for years was finally crumbling before her. An officer approached and handed her a form. "Mrs. Martinez, we need your signature to formalize the complaint." Irene took the pen with a trembling hand. Brugilda spun around and glared at her. "How dare you do this to me, you ungrateful wretch?" Irene did not respond. "I opened my family's doors to you. I gave you everything I had." Sergio lifted his head, his dark gaze piercing her. "Irene." She signed the paper without hesitation and handed it back to the officer. "Take her away," ordered the officer with an impassive voice. Brugilda's screams rose again as she was escorted out of the room. Sergio made no attempt to stop them. Irene took a step forward, feeling the need to look at him one last time. "You never loved me," she murmured firmly. "You just wanted my money." Sergio clenched his jaw and looked away. He no longer had any control over her. The officer at his side motioned for him to walk, and he complied without resistance. Irene watched them disappear down the hallway. Everything was over. But the emptiness inside her did not disappear. She brought a hand to her face and closed her eyes, allowing the fatigue to overtake her. She did not know how long she stood there, in the middle of the police station, but when she looked up, the first thing she saw was her reflection in a mirror on the other side of the room. A woman with a pale face, tired eyes, skin marked by sleepless nights. She stared at herself, feeling an immense weight on her chest. How did I let them do this to me? She received no answer. Only the sound of her own breathing, deep and trembling. But something inside her broke, and at the same time, something new was born. She realized, in that moment, that it was not her fault. Victims of financial and emotional abuse don't always see the chains until it's too late. She had deceived herself into thinking that love should be measured in sacrifices. She had convinced herself that if she gave more, if she worked harder, if she tried harder, things would change. But it was never enough, because it was never about her. She was prey in a cage built by others. And now, finally, she had the key. The sound of her phone pulled her from her thoughts. She checked the screen and saw the email she had been waiting for. Subject: job offer, confirmation of relocation. She read the words calmly, making sure she wasn't imagining things. The offer was still standing. A new city, a new start. A train awaited her at the station. She took a deep breath, as if filling her lungs with a breath of fresh air after years submerged in murky waters. She grabbed her bag and left the police station without looking back. The world outside felt larger, more open. She walked down the street with determined steps, feeling the cold breeze strike her face. She was not afraid. She had no doubts. The train arrived at the station with a metallic roar. Irene boarded, found her seat by the window, and slumped against the backrest, feeling the weight of everything she had carried for years begin to fade. The landscape began to move slowly, then with increasing speed. She left behind the city, the shadows of the past, Brugilda's screams, Sergio's vacant gaze. She kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, watching as the world opened up before her, full of possibilities. She did not know what awaited her. But for the first time in a long time, that did not scare her. The train moved forward, and with it Irene. The past was behind her, but the lesson would remain with her forever. Sometimes, the worst betrayal is not that of others, but the one we do to ourselves by staying in places where we are not valued. But it is always possible to start over. What an emotional ending! I'm glad you made it here. This kind of story shows us the human capacity to overcome adversities and find the strength to move forward despite the most difficult circumstances. If you found yourself in a similar situation, facing such great betrayals and challenges, how would you deal with this situation? What decisions would you make to protect your loved ones and rebuild your life? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to know how you would approach such a complex challenge and what you thought about the development of this story. Also, if you enjoyed the narrative, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends and family. Your support is crucial to continue bringing more moving and thoughtful stories like this one. Thank you for joining us until the end. Don't miss the next narrative appearing on your screen. We have many captivating stories and guaranteed entertainment especially for you. See you in the next video. A hug.